The New York Islanders have made their first round of cuts, but now some tough decisions are ahead for the final roster spots. We've got that, plus a recap of Friday's nice win over the Devils. All that and more coming up on today's Locked On Islanders podcast.
Your Locked On Islanders, your daily podcast on the New York Islanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On Islanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We've got a lot to discuss on today's show. The season getting ever so close. But first, if there's something Islanders related on your mind, if you have a question, a comment, maybe a topic you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, just send us an email. The email address, lockedonislanders@gmail.com. And if you leave your first name and where you're from, we're happy to mention you on the show when we discuss whatever's on your mind. You could also follow the show on X at Locked On Isles, and you could follow me, Gil Martin, on X at Ice Wars, NYR, VSNYI. We'll keep you up to date on all things Islanders all year long, and I am live tweeting during nearly every Islanders home and road game. So join me for some instant insight and analysis, and it's great to talk Islanders hockey with you, game time or anytime. The Islanders made their first round of cuts, and I can't say there are major surprises here. Basically, the Islanders made the following moves. These players were loaned to Bridgeport: William Dufour, Mark Gatcomb, Alex Jeffries, Eetu Liukas, Matthew Maggio, Camden Thiesing. Those are the forwards. The defensemen, Aiden Fulp, Isaiah George, Travis Mitchell, Kallio Delius, Marshall Warren, and then goaltender Henrik Tikkanen. No surprise there. Those players have been cut after 10 days of training camp, and now you're kind of looking at the battle for the final roster spots, and mostly we're talking about forwards. And first, before we even get into that, I wanted to talk about some of these younger players who were but sent back to Bridgeport's camp, because I think some of them made an impression. I think, for example, we saw Matthew Maggio improve his game over what we saw from him a year ago. And, again, is he ready to play in the NHL? No, probably not. But did he make a better impression? Did he take a step forward? Absolutely. I think that we saw some flashes from Camden Thiesing. Certainly, I think, other players were a little shakier. We definitely saw that Henrik Tikkanen doesn't look ready for prime time. And again, this is not a major surprise. Did I expect Henrik Tikkanen to be in a real competition to make the Islanders roster out of training camp this year, even if we assume, and still no update on Ilya Sorokin, he has still not participated in a practice. So he's still skating on his own, but no participation in practice. Even if we assume that Sorokin starts the season on IR, then I didn't expect Tikkanen to be a threat to make the roster as the third goalie. I think we were looking at, Marcus Hogberg. We were looking possibly at Keith Kincaid. Jakub Skarek, I think, would also be ahead of Tikkanen. So no surprise that Tikkanen did not make the team, and there's no surprise that, he struggled a little bit, that he just showed that at this stage in his development, he is not ready to play in the National Hockey League. And okay, so be it. Let's see how he handles it and where he goes from here. And, some other players, I think, just made a good impression during their time with the team. And other guys who made that strong first impression are still there, still on the roster. And we're going to talk about that coming up a little bit later on in the show. But, there is going to be a battle now, a battle for those final few spots on the roster among the forwards. And it's going to be important that the Islanders basically make the right choices and give this team what it needs. So the cuts are made. They are not shockers by any stretch of the imagination. I didn't expect either William Dufour or Matthew Maggio to be, realistic options for this Islanders team this year. That was not, what I expected. I didn't think Alex Jeffries or Eetu Liukas were ready. I think Isaiah George was a little bit of a disappointment overall. And again, I'm not saying that his lack of readiness right now is what caused, like that doesn't mean he's not still a prospect, that he doesn't have the potential to be a solid contributor at the NHL level. It just means he's not going to be able to do that this year, most likely. That he'll need another year of AHL hockey. And after that year, hopefully he shows you a little bit more, puts on a little bit more bulk to his frame, gets used to playing against adults, gets used to the faster pace of the game at the AHL level, and then eventually next year at the NHL level. So no major shocks here. And instead of 3 groups now, the Islanders are down to 1 group. And on the ice, basically, you had everyone left except Semyon Varlamov just had a rest day. So he was not on the ice yesterday, Sunday. And then Hudson Fasching, who is out with a lower body injury. Now, there was one big move made by the Islanders in practice. And again, how much it means, well, we'll see. We know this about Patrick Roy from the half season that we had him as coach last year. He likes to mix things up. He'll start with a line combination, and in the middle of the first period, second period, if things aren't working, he'll switch it up. And so the change that was made, Maxim Tsyplakov, now on the second line instead of Simon Holmstrom. And look, Roy could just be basically saying, hey, I want to see what he could do. Tsyplakov has played well in the preseason games that he's been a part of. And him getting a chance with the second line, I think it makes sense. And B, I think it's something that, that's the goal for the New York Islanders, to get Tsyplakov into the top 6 eventually. You didn't sign him, as Lou Lamoriello said, to be in Bridgeport. And a guy who scored 31 goals last year, you didn't sign him so he could be a 4th line or 3rd line guy long term. So, we'll see what happens with Tsyplakov. And here's what Roy said at practice Sunday. Tsyplakov played such a great game, we might try him in a different role. Now, he doesn't have the speed that you want from, a typical top 6 guy, but he's got a high hockey IQ. He's a good passer, and he handles the puck well. And sometimes, with your skill set, when you handle the puck well, you can make up for the lack of speed by creating time and space with your stick handling and with your anticipation of plays. So I'm interested in seeing if Tsyplakov plays on that second line with Brock Nelson and Kyle Palmieri tonight against the Flyers at UBS Arena. And if the answer is yes, how's he going to do? That may be one of the big questions that have to be answered tonight, and we will preview tonight's game a little bit later on in the show. So, lots more to discuss here on today's episode. Some battles now, now that the cuts have been made, we're down to 6 players kind of fighting for 2 or 3 roster spots. We'll break down the competition for you. Plus, we will take a brief look back at Friday's solid win over the Devils, talk a little bit about tonight's game against Philly. And oh yes, for our Islanders birthday of the day, a player who was with the Islanders in the late 2000s, early 2010s, who rode the Bridgeport shuttle back and forth. We're talking about a fourth line forward who did a solid job for the Islanders in that role. We've got all that and more coming up on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at Game Time. Game Time now has a new feature called Game Time Picks that make getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff and shows you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. My favorite feature on Game Time remains the view from your seat. You just go on the app and you could see a panoramic view from your seat before you buy the tickets, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. All you got to do is download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL. You can get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. So there's a battle. We've got some decisions to make, and how Lou Lamoriello will handle those decisions is going to be important. There are roster spots out there. Right now, I'm looking at 6 players, quite possibly going for 2 or 3 spots on this bottom 6. You still have guys who were with the team last year who may not be with the team this year. Let's start with Matt Martin. They did not release Matt Martin or Keith Kincaid. You notice when I talked in the last segment about the roster cuts, neither of their names were there. They are still in training camp with the team practicing. But, is there a spot for Matt Martin on this roster? Obviously, if you're going to place, or if you do end up placing Ilya Sorokin on LTIR, there's room to add that 23rd player, most likely, the 14th forward to the roster. And every day that basically that Sorokin is on LTIR, which he's not yet, but if they place him there, you get a little cap space because the cap is actually figured out on a game-by-game, day-by-day basis. If Matt Martin makes the roster, I think he is going to be in a similar role to what we saw Ross Johnston do a couple of years ago. He will not play every day. He may play 25 games unless other guys ahead of him on the roster get hurt. And he very well could just, be the 13th or 14th forward. And when you're playing a team with a little more size or a little more physicality, you could sit a Simon Holmstrom and put in a Matt Martin and get a little more toughness. That's an option. And, we've seen Matt Martin in the preseason. He has not played poorly. He's more or less been the same Matt Martin we saw last year. So that's one possibility. You also have Oliver Wahlstrom. He scored a goal Friday against the Devils. He needed that goal. He has not looked outstanding. The thing about Wally, again, the big issue, two big issues. Number one, what he does when he doesn't have the puck on his stick. And then number two, consistency. Consistency of effort, consistency of performance. He still hasn't established that consistency enough yet to nail down an everyday position on this roster. If you're looking for a guy who can shoot the puck and maybe give a little offensive juice to your bottom six, Oliver Wahlstrom is certainly an option. But at $1 million a year, he'd cost a little bit more under the cap than most of your alternatives. And I just haven't seen him take his game to the next level. Now, if they choose to put Wahlstrom on waivers, they'd have to do that to send him down to Bridgeport, so they could either lose him for nothing or try to trade him before rosters have to be set on October 7th. The clock is ticking. I think we'll see Wally in at least one of the final two preseason games, and then, it gets to be decision time. You got Hudson Fasching. He's hurt right now, and that certainly cannot be helping his cause. Fasching looked pretty good the first preseason game, not as good the second one, but the injury may have had something to do with that. Again, you know what Fasching can do. I think he was much better, not last year, but the year before. Seemed to struggle a lot more with his consistency last year. Not sure if Fasching makes the top 12. I think he'll be in the top 14. He'll make the roster, maybe. If I had to bet, I think he will, but it's not guaranteed by any means, and his injury isn't helping him, and he may end up starting the season on IR, unless it's a serious injury, not long-term IR, but he could start the season there. He is also an option. And then you've got Simon Holmstrom, who, again, played with the top six, played on that second line for the early part of training camp, still may end up there, assuming he makes the roster. Patrick Waugh has expressed the need to get more consistent effort every game out of Simon Holmstrom. Obviously, there's not a lot of physicality to his game. He does have the speed. He does need to be a little more confident in his offensive game because I think he can shoot the puck. His career shooting percentage is outstanding, but he doesn't shoot the puck often enough. So I think that's part of the issue with Holmstrom. He's a good penalty killer at times, dangerous, getting goals on the PK. And now the question becomes, does Simon Holmstrom earn a spot on the roster? And again, you can send Holmstrom down without having him go through waivers. That may hurt his chances of starting the season on the NHL roster. Then you have a couple of more guys who are still with the team who I think have just looked really good in preseason, but may not be able to make the team. And it's going to be interesting. Certainly, you got to take into consideration Liam Foudy and Fredrik Karlstrom. Both of them are still here. I think both of them looked really solid Friday against the Devils. Foudy has really good speed, but maybe doesn't consistently do enough with it. That's sort of his reputation thus far in his NHL career. Karlstrom looked good. He's experienced. I think Karlstrom is most likely going to be one of those guys who, if an injury happens at his position, he's the first guy they call up. But FYI, Foudy, Karlstrom and Samuel Bolduc skated together before the main group took to the ice on Sunday in practice. So they're still on the roster, but they may not be as high on the priority list. But Foudy is making Lou Lamoriello's decision difficult. The other guy who may be making things a little difficult is Julien Gauthier, and he also played well Friday. He does not have the reputation of being a consistent player, also brings speed to the equation, and now it just becomes a question of, out of these 6 or 7 guys, which 3, maybe 4, make the roster, and then who is in the lineup for game 1. And, Lou Lamoriello's got some difficult decisions to make, but the encouraging thing is that there are guys on this roster who are making that decision more difficult. All right, we have got a lot more to get to, and we're going to keep our eye on that roster battle every step of the way between now and October 7th, when the Islanders have to set those rosters for the first time. We've got more to get to. We'll talk a little bit about Friday's win over the Devils. We'll talk a little bit about tonight's game against Philadelphia. Plus, we'll have our Islanders' birthday of the day. All that and more still to come on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. You can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And this is a great time. So much to check out on FanDuel. The odds on the baseball playoffs, on college and pro football, which are in full swing. The Islanders playing tonight against the Flyers. You could check out all the odds on that, or maybe, want to bet that the Islanders make the playoffs. Check out all the latest odds at FanDuel. Again, get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just head on over to FanDuel.com. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you for making Locked On Islanders your first listen today. Now for your second listen, go find Locked On NHL, where the local experts keep you updated daily on all the biggest storylines ahead of the season. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So a nice win Friday. Not going to talk a lot about it. Preseason games, they have their limits. I think Dennis Cholowski looked pretty good. 2 assists. +3 in the game. That was certainly welcome. Fredrik Karlstrom, who we mentioned, a goal and an assist, a +2. I think Varley, only giving up 1 goal in 40 minutes, did a nice job. A nice .941 save percentage. And I'm giving credit, by the way, to Jakub Skarek, because he really, he's been in 2 preseason games, played half of one and a period in the other. Hasn't given up a goal. I just, hasn't been tested a lot. Hasn't been called on to make any spectacular saves. But overall, you just got to be happy with the way he's played. And, it's amazing that the Islanders managed to score 5 goals on just 17 shots on goal while holding the Devils to 25 shots. Wasn't a very physical game, but again, the penalty kill, giving up a goal, the only Devils goal coming on the power play, but the Islanders power play scoring twice, and the Islanders blocking 18 shots compared to just 6 for the Devils. So overall, got to be pleased with that. As for tonight's game against the Flyers, again, I expect Marcus Hogberg to get the start. I think with a strong performance, he can probably nail down the backup goalie spot behind Varlamov. Whether or not we see any of Keith Kincaid tonight. I would like to see him play at least part of one exhibition game, maybe, one period, just to see what he can do. I'm definitely keeping my eye on if Maxim Tsyplakov plays and he gets a chance with the second line. And then the other thing I'm definitely keeping an eye on, the penalty kill, and then those battles for those last spots in the lineup. Oh, yeah, one other guy I want to talk a little bit about from Friday's game, Samuel Bolduc. He had an assist. He was a +1, saw time on both the power play and the penalty kill. He's improving. He's not there yet, but, definitely a little less hesitant about what would happen if he ended up in the lineup. So, again, overall, I'm liking what I saw Friday. I want to see, again, a good performance. And the last two games are a little bit different. You're concentrating more on getting the players. There's 2 goals now. You want to figure out the last few roster spots, which we spoke about earlier on the show. And then the other part is you've absolutely got to figure out, get your guys ready. So you want to see Semyon Varlamov, who's almost certainly going to start opening night. You want to let him play a full game. You want to see some of your regular players, get more chemistry together, get more ice time together. I think that's what we're going to see tonight. That's what we're going to see in the preseason finale against the Rangers. And that's what you do to get ready for the season. Time now for our Islanders' birthday of the day. Sunday was the 47th birthday of former Islanders winger John Sim, the New Glasgow, Nova Scotia native, a third-round pick of the Dallas Stars. Back in 1996, played for the Stars, the Predators, the Kings, the Penguins, the Flyers, the Panthers, and the Thrashers before joining the Islanders for the 2007-2008 season, and stayed on the island through 2010-2011. But boy, other than 2009-2010, here was a guy who really rode the Bridgeport Express up and down on that ferry back and forth from the island to Bridgeport. Always a plugger, a hard-working winger. He could put the puck in the net. Scored 17 goals for the Thrashers back in 06-07. One of his better games as an Islander, April Fool's Day, April 1st, 2010. Islanders hosting the Flyers at the Nassau Coliseum. Brian Boucher, the goalie for Philadelphia. Martin Biron, the goalie for the Islanders. And in this game, with the Islanders up 2-0, John Sim, our Islanders' birthday of the day, sets up Franz Nielsen. And it's 3-0 Islanders after that play. Then in the third period, Sim sets up Trent Hunter for his 11th. That gave the Islanders a 5-1 lead. And midway through the third, Sim getting his 12th goal of the year. Sean Bergenheim and Dylan Reese with the helpers. Islanders go on to beat the Flyers by a score of 6-4 for Jonathan Sim. 1 goal, 2 assists. He is a +3 on a 3-point night, and he accomplished that on 4 shots on goal. Did all that in just 11 minutes and 54 seconds of ice time. 31 saves for Martin Biron against his former team as the Islanders skate to the win. So John Sim is our Islanders' birthday of the day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. We'll be back tomorrow with our key takeaways from tonight's game against the Flyers. We'll have the latest injury updates. Hopefully we'll get an update on Ilya Sorokin soon. I'd love for him to return to practice, but I'll believe it when I see it. And we'll have the latest updates as to who made it more likely they'll make the roster after tonight's game and who maybe hurt their chances by playing poorly. We've got all that coming up tomorrow. Until then, have a great day, everybody. Stay safe. And of course, let's go Islanders.